The information in this podcast is educational and general in nature and does not take into consideration the listener's personal circumstances. Therefore, it is not intended to be a substitute for specific, individualized financial, legal, or tax advice. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a final decision. Arrowside Capital and guests on the podcast are invested or may seek to invest in companies covered in this podcast. As a result, listeners should be aware that the firm may have a conflict of interest that could affect the objectivity of this podcast. Currently, Arrowside Capital holds positions in ARM, Appfolio, Manhattan Associates, ServiceNow, Fair Isaac, and Meta. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Hidden Value Creation Podcast. With me today is a good friend of mine, longtime friend, Rem Reynolds, who is he's had a terrific and wide-ranging background, and right now he's spending much of his time on AI. I thought he would be a great expert to bring on, given all of the things that are going on in AI, and especially with this week with DeepSeek, and we'll get into that a little bit. And so, welcome to the podcast, Rem.
Hey Tucker, how you doing? It's been a short while, and thanks for the invite.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you could join us. So I think it'd be great for everyone that's listening to know a little bit about your background and sort of what you're working on today.
Yeah, great. I think last time I saw you, we were coming out of college. I was in New York and moved down to Atlanta. Just to catch you up, I built a tech business for 16 years, mostly around telecommunications and IT, and really it was a great experience and got my roots deeply entrenched into all things telecom, data centers, software as a service, and sold that in 2012, and really was looking for some new adventures in my life. I have to say I was kind of checked out and did need to get a breathe, and stumbled into a relationship doing events of all things, and I've been working alongside Sir Richard Branson for the last 14 years doing events, and my interest in AI kind of re-peaked, I would say like around 2023, and I think that a lot of, I'm not an old guard AI person, but clearly saw the implications of ChatGPT and really sat down and analyzed the space and felt that it was an important topic, and talked with Richard about doing an AI event on Necker in the same format that we've done with some of the other events that we've hosted. And we invited about 70 people out. Many of them were thought leaders, a lot of builders. We partnered. New York Stock Exchange was a sponsor, and we had really deep discussions about where this is all going. And so I've kind of redirected my efforts and my entrepreneurial efforts in and around AI, and convinced it's going to be the most important transformative technology of our generation at this point, and certainly far-reaching implications for our kids. But throw it back to you.
Great. Well, thanks for that. So, yeah, I think it'd be great if you spent a minute or two talking a little bit about what you learned at your event that you did recently. And a few of the things, I think what we want to center this discussion on is maybe a little bit about what's happening today, but really try to focus in on where we think we'll be in a couple of years to 5 years time. I'm not sure you can go out much further than that with AI, given the pace of change. But I think that keeping it centered on sort of the direction of where we're going would be great. And I think you have obviously a lot of insights on that coming out of the conference.
Yeah, so at the conference, I mean, it was interesting. There were two general themes that took shape. One was how AI is going to impact planet and the humanity, and I feel like that's a really important discussion because um, we saw how social media really grabbed a hold of all of us and especially our kids. I feel AI has a 10x or 100x potential to really invade our lives in ways that we can't see. I mean, everything from privacy to just how we spend our time. So the trade-offs between like an analog existence, and that's just embracing another person versus taking all the abundance that's going to come through AI, and are we really going to repurpose that time for more analog type moments and free up our time, or are we going to reinvest that time into just getting ahead faster? So, which brings me to the other side of this, which is, I met a lot of builders. They're all very young people. Let's just say very Sam Altman-esque type in their personas, but they're all pretty much focused exclusively on creating shareholder value and getting there as fast as they can. I mean, they're not really thinking about the second order implications of the tech they're building. And I just think that's kind of coming back to the way we're wired as humans. These paleo-ethic, instincts like greed, power, insecurities. I mean, a lot of these things are driving these builders, and I think so the implication there is that it's going to be very hard to stop this train that's moving very quickly. But yeah, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean that is really interesting, and I guess one direction I'd like to take it because it is it's certainly top of mind for a lot of people is the sort of the amount of compute power that'll be needed in the future, and also the amount of energy that will be needed, which also has sort of second order implications because we're really not ready for alternative sources of power at the moment. We're still relying on fossil fuels, which then raises a whole bunch of other ESG type issues and concerns. So were there some things that came out of the conference that would provide a little bit of maybe what are the builders thinking about when it comes to these things?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the compute and the energy intersection, and certainly with Stargate, getting announced, and those discussions have been going on for a while. But I have to say, it was quite funny when it came to the topic of energy. I mean, nearly everybody threw their arms up in the air, and they didn't have a clean answer for it. It was something that they knew we have finite resources, and the scaling, of compute, data centers, and the energy implications, and some of the more recent movements by people like Microsoft, kind of foretell, how much compute is required. So I do believe, DeepSeek and some of these engineering innovations, let's call it an engineering innovation, hold out a lot of promise. And I think that's, as we can see by the markets more recently, maybe there are arbitrages to reduce these costs dramatically just by, looking at the problem differently. I think the Chinese, because they were constrained by some of the, restrictions around chips, they were forced to think differently about the resources they had. They used an older stack, and they came up. The one thing you can't take away is the fact that they did, whether they stole some of the technology or whatever, they did innovate, and they created an arbitrage there. Let's call it a 1/20th in terms of the cost per token as a target. And I think that's good for a lot of people. So I talked to some builders yesterday. They're all evaluating this open source technology to see if it can help them, get to market faster. So I do believe. Also, having said that, I do think we're a little overreacting. I think, in the grand scheme of things, people say, "Well, we've already used all the data, we've already scraped it." But the truth is, you've got multimodal type applications. We're moving beyond text. We're moving into pictures, and we're moving into visual, 3D, applications that are going to require so much more data. I mean, one example is, the project that Fei Li is working on around spatial intelligence in her World Labs. I mean, it's very early going, but, these types of projects, and certainly the rise of robots and the interaction there, and, Tesla, and how they're processing this data. I mean, it's going to be insatiable. So I don't think, and there's many people that agree that like this is like a little blip, but I feel like the path is going to be, it's going to keep going. And I think Jensen from NVIDIA's got an incredible vision of really, he's talking about autonomous vehicles, robotics, and then the intersection of, another important topic, which is, automations and agency and workflows, because what we're getting right now is like when we type in something, we're getting a very smart person telling us, like here's what the problem is. The next step of this is, okay, don't show me, do it. So that's where we're going to start connecting in a lot of these workflows and workflow automation. So, and I look at it as kind of like scaling is going like this, right? But when we start building in workflows and agency and automation, we're kind of going wider. Like we're taking the existing data set that's been built and we're building out.
Yep.
And I think that's going to be a big topic this coming year for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot in there. And I think it'd be good for us to sort of maybe pull the DeepSeek in right now, because it's sort of the biggest news that maybe has hit AI in a while.
Sure.
And so I'll just, throw in so my initial reaction was twofold. One is, wow, this is totally possible that this makes these LLMs much more of a commodity than we realized.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's totally possible, and we'll see. And I think part of what, at least I'm seeing from the investment side, is tremendous amounts of money being raised for OpenAI, Anthropic, et cetera, to build out these LLMs, which are going to, in theory, it's not going to be a winner take all, because no one's going to want to allow one model to be the de facto model. And that's too threatening, perhaps, for some of these big tech folks. All of big tech have balance sheets that far exceed some countries. And so they've got the money to be able to spend to be the player. Mm-hmm. However, if it becomes apparent that it's going to be commoditized, maybe they back off on that a little bit. So that was one thing that I sort of thought about. And then the other thing, I was very skeptical that given the amount of intellectual talent that we have at the superscalers, the big tech companies that are spending billions of dollars per year on CapEx, that all of a sudden, one Chinese company in a garage figured it out. And so I think that there's still a lot of things that need to be answered out of this, rather than sort of saying that this is like the be-all, end-all on having figured out the LLM situation. Is there anything in there resonating?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think let's start with who we're dealing with here. I mean, we're dealing with China, and I think a lot of people have given China and this particular spinoff from a private equity fund a lot of credibility. Notoriously, we know that China, they steal a lot of technology. They have a tendency to fabricate things. So, they said that they built the DeepSeek V3 on, 2,000 NVIDIA chips, but people like Elon and some other people, the CEO of Scale AI, feel it's closer to 50,000 chips. And, there's other interesting points around how they're scraping the data. So there's a lot of, theft among some of these LLMs. So they've actually trained some of their agents to go into like ChatGPT and then kind of process a lot of what's already been built in there, siphon it out, and use that to really build their model upon. So in terms of the efficiency, I think the Chinese are known for being very clever and innovating at all costs. But I don't know, in terms of the grand scheme of things and where this is going, that it's going to slow down the capital expenditures that are being made by Meta and obviously OpenAI and others. I just think it's not going to slow down, and that's my initial thought. And I'd like to see how this DeepSeek evolves over the next 2 to 4 to 6 weeks, and I think a lot of things will come out about this project, and but we can't argue that there has been an innovation, and I think a lot of the U.S. Tech companies have been so focused on scaling out bigger and better training models, and so this is very clever, and I think a lot of people have taken note.
Yeah, for sure. That probably is the most important takeaway, it seems, for initially, because there's a lot of stuff that we still don't know. And also, it's a bit of a reversal on what's happened with a lot of these superscalers and also some of the leaders, including OpenAI, who have gone to Congress and said, hey, we're going to be the responsible ones in this whole AI thing. You just have to trust us. And, oh, by the way, the price of entry to become as big and great as we are is very high, almost to try to encourage people to not do it. So I found that this was pretty interesting in the grand scheme, number one. But number two, it's probably going to change a little bit of the way that people look at these LLMs. And then the next layer will probably, the chatter, at least amongst a lot of investors in the last few days, has been, is the application layer now the more important layer? And that was not the case 6 months ago, for sure. Yeah. Definitely a year ago, that was not the case. So that's going to make it really interesting. But there's also obviously some geopolitical positioning that's going on with all of this too.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree. I've heard some recent, good podcasts on this topic of the software layer and the importance of it. My theory, even prior to, I would say going back, my overall worldview and thesis was that there's probably like 4 or 5 major intersections that are out there, So obviously we have these large language models, and that's evolved to a certain point in place. And I would say the next iteration, and you can call it the software layer, is, are these workflows, these agents, the agentic elements of this next layer of innovation that's taking shape right now, even on a small scale. I mean, you have companies like Make and Zapier that have aggregated all these APIs, and they pretty much connect to everything. Everything's getting interconnected and very cost effective. You can, just as an example, and we've discussed this, even companies like, Salesforce and HubSpot, which are the leaders, in CRM, you can now, like with things like Airtable and Make, do some pretty incredible custom integrations and do some amazing things for next to nothing. But that's just the beginning, because everybody's looking, at agency. I mean, Bainoff from Salesforce, he is singularly focused on agents and workflows, and a lot of companies are going to be using this as the next layer. So you've got LLMs, you've got agents, workflows, and then you've got robotics. Okay, so there's a lot of innovations that are happening. I mean, you can buy a robot now for $16,000, and if you calculate out, the cost per hour to utilize one of these robots, it's like 40 cents an hour, So it's incredibly inexpensive, to gain access to this technology, and that's going to start coming down in price. And then you're going to see the integration of, large language models, agents, robotics, connecting. And then I would also say that the two other intersection points that are out there, one is we can't ignore blockchain. I think that obviously I went in on blockchain when it was down because I just feel people forget very quickly, and and that was the case with blockchain. It went from this incredible speculative thing to the red-haired stepchild, and now it's come back full throttle, and Trump is embracing it. And I've always asked a singular question, like, what's the app? Like, I never got it. Like, what is it you're creating that, like, with ChatGPT, I get it. There it is. It's very tangible. With blockchain, there was never really a killer app that I just said, oh, that's it. But I do feel there's some massive privacy and security issues around this technology. And so there may be a very important role for blockchain in the future. And then lastly, which, Zuckerberg bet Meta on, I would say, virtual reality or augmented reality. I still feel that is a massive space that, like, it's gone into a kind of a winter right now. But I used to use my Oculus goggles and for different purposes, like, meditation or going out on, sitting by the river, and I still feel that that's a positive thing. But if you can envision, putting on goggles that are a little lighter, it's all voice activated. You've got your avatar personal assistant, and you can have as many as you want, and you're literally just, with these agents, it's like they're going to be able to do a ton of things for you. And that's the other part of this discussion. It's not really just the singular bot. It's the ability to scale out like 1,000 bots, right? So companies are going to be looking at, like, work, and the HR department is going to be comprised of humans, but also agents will fall under the HR department, because these will be virtual employees, and this is how things will evolve. And I do believe that there will be some second iteration in the next 3 to 5 to 7 years around virtual reality and just dropping into an environment that has a lot of work-related applications. So,
Yeah, all really good points in there. I think one of the things that seems to be a little bit maybe underappreciated in this AI situation, like, I think a lot of the focus so far has been on the headlines and sort of like the shock and awe of seeing what NVIDIA has done as a business, being, basically sort of right now, the de facto, sort of chip manufacturer that's unlocking this, and we'll see how that plays out. And then, but the other thing is some of the stuff that you're talking about, which is like, what will the software layer actually look like? Agentic AI seems to be the first place that seems to be. So if you have data and you have customers, you need to provide agents, right? Because you're going to try to make their life simpler in theory, with the way that these models operate today. And then other things that may not be as obvious, like the robotics and the augmented reality. And then sort of blockchain seems to be the type of technology that could enable a lot of this sort of the proliferation to become defendable and transactionable. And so there's a lot that's there. I guess the first thing I would want to explore is sort of this agentic AI agents are going to come first here. And then whether or not, like, and then there's also a lot of talk about AGI and like how far out is AGI?
Sure.
And then like does AGI, and then let's pull it together. So does AGI does does this next layer of software rely on getting to AGI, or are the LLMs good enough for you to notice once you have these agents that, oh wow, this is really helping me?
Yeah, so you bring up a couple of good questions. I mean, so artificial general intelligence, we're talking about human-like cognitive abilities, right, across a wide range of tasks. And, currently, when you really dive in and into some of these LLMs, you realize that you can quickly bump up against certain things, and you realize that there are a lot of limitations currently. So, and it's a moving definition. But I do feel that we've come so far so fast in the last year and a half, and the rate of acceleration, I do feel that people are kind of compressing their prediction in terms of when we'll hit AGI into really, I'm hearing a consensus around 3 to 5 years. People like, Jeffrey Hinton, they still are a little further out in the 5 to 20 years. And obviously you've got people that feel that we won't hit it for a while. But I don't think that really matters. I think from an agent's standpoint, I really think, I don't know if you really saw the documentary on AlphaGo, and
No, I haven't.
yeah, so it's an amazing documentary. I encourage everybody to watch it. It's out on YouTube, but it talks about how Google used reinforcement learning to go in and basically create a computer program that would beat the best Go player in the world. Go is far more complicated than chess. It's very big in Asia. It was a big deal, and they achieved that by using reinforcement learning. And I think the point there is that this reinforcement learning, which is also what DeepSeek used to build their application, I think that technology and that approach to solving problems is going to get layered into a lot of things. Okay, in very narrow places, like could be like the travel industry or around finance, around this. And I do believe that we're going to get some very focused, applications that are going to do some incredible things, and it will create a tremendous amount of efficiency and abundance. And like we could take education as a very ripe example of a industry that really is ripe for democratizing and personalizing and using bots to kind of re-engineer a whole industry. So I'm really excited about these types of technologies. But in terms of bringing it back to artificial general intelligence, I think that's more of like interacting with like a ChatGPT voice bot, and getting to a point where you really have a meaningful conversation and you really can't tell the difference. I think that's 5 to 10 years off. That's just my humble opinion.
Interesting. Yep. Yeah, I guess one of the things that occurs to me is that there's going to be, especially when I think about this as an investor, there's always this trade-off of enthusiasm and proof that goes into valuing a company. And so if there's tons of enthusiasm and the proof doesn't show, of course, that ends up being a bubble. And then if there's enthusiasm that doesn't quite meet expectations, then you get inflated valuations followed by more reasonable valuations, or even a winter like you were talking about relative to like blockchain and crypto. And then once the proof comes, then the enthusiasm returns. And so in this case, it seems as though there's going to be a lot of pull and tug with AI as we go along the next 5 years. There's going to be enthusiasm that will build, and certainly there was a lot, a little bit earlier in 2024, almost all the way through 2024. And then there has to be some proof. So then you're going to have companies come through and provide something that goes on top of these LLMs that delivers some value now before AGI. Because if we're just going to be waiting for AGI, then this will just end up being enthusiasm with no proof.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up some really important questions, and again, there's a spectrum of opinions, but my thinking here is that the big winners are going to be the consumers. I mean, we're already seeing it. You might pay $70 a seat for HubSpot. To me, like paying $20 a month for ChatGTP is like wildly better return on investment. I think valuations it's just, again, this is your zone, and I'd love to get your opinion on it. I just do sense that we're a bit of a bubble, and I think from a venture standpoint, I think it's very hard to forecast at all who the winners are going to be. Again, we acknowledge a very volatile, changing environment. If you go back to the last boom, like let's say the 1990s, when we had the telecom deregulation that went alongside, the browsers and the internet, we went from 3 or 4, 5 major telcos into 600 or 700 competitive local exchange carriers that ultimately wound down to, the big ones reacquiring them. There might have been like 4 or 5 or 6 left at the end of the day. So I don't think there's a correlation between between the markets and investing and what the true value that's going to be created and handed back to the average consumer. And so that's kind of your world. I think a lot of this just moves on like psychology and momentum. Like, I'm actually in the market, I'm long. If I am long, I'm long on the bigger companies that really like the Googles and the Microsofts and the Apples. And even though Apple to me has really dropped the ball, they're actually, in my opinion, a winner of DeepSeek, because like I thought they were going to sit back. They have that strategy of sitting back and letting the world, the old Bell South strategy. But I started to be concerned that maybe they were asleep at the wheel. And then hearing Jensen's talk at CES and how they were coming down into hardware and creating devices that will ultimately compete. And they have that software layer as well. I really saw a clear vision, and I felt like, Apple was really, adrift. But I think they will have a second chance here, because companies like Apple and Google have such a massive infrastructure. They still control the phone. They still control your Gmail, your hosting, and it's going to be very hard to move and displace these people. And I think they're making good moves. IBM, Meta. I like Meta because they're fairly insulated. They have social media. Like, you can't tear that down as quickly as you can, for example, search. Like, search is getting redefined right now. Companies like Perplexity are coming in and taking away revenues potentially from Google. They had a lot of ad-related revenues tied to search. Now things are changing there. So people are I don't use Google unless I really have to. And I think those types of things will put pressure on Google, but they're so resilient and they're so deep into their AI infrastructure. I think they have a couple cards up their sleeve as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how some of those bigger players duke it out. I think the way that I'm looking at this is that until we get further along in total broad adoption, we're probably looking at a 8-10 year cycle of massive growth, but not clear. It seems clear that some of these bigger folks stand to be beneficiaries. So certainly big tech stand to be beneficiaries, and a lot of that has to do with their resourcing and their pole position in the cloud, because everything is, they own the infrastructure and they own the market share for the infrastructure that this is all going to be built on top of. And then this cycle, these cycles usually, I mean, there's so much enthusiasm early on, and maybe it won't deliver in terms of proof. I'm not sure. I think that there are pockets of places that I feel like valuations show some enthusiasm, but they're not so wildly extended that you
Yeah.
can't say I'm going to stay invested here because I don't know how the trajectory on this 10 year cycle will look. And then there's other places where you just see things, just get a little bit out of hand, and you can't extrapolate out what the assumptions actually are where they could ever meet them.
Right.
Right? So I
Yeah.
think you have to be careful. I think that's, I'm sort of, pumping up, the investor side of this where having had some experience in different cycles before, whether it's, dealing with the 1990s PC era. I remember that one vividly, the dot-com.
Yeah.
This is different than dot-com in my mind because we already have that infrastructure layer in place. And then a lot of the companies that you've seen that have had massive share price returns have also had massive increases in their revenue and cash flow. And so that's different than dot-com. Dot-com was big valuation, no revenue, and like no chance of cash flow. And that was, that was a disaster. But ultimately the market pays for what they envision. They can see cash flows coming to them over a 5-10 year period. And as of right now, there are going to be some pockets of, quote unquote bubble behavior. But bubble behavior usually is everybody gives all the credit widely up front, and that everybody's got the consensus that it's going to work. I still talk to a lot of investors who are pretty skeptical about the amount of spending that's going to be needed to do the type of AI that people are envisioning over the next 5 years. So anyway, I guess what I come back to is I agree with you that the consumer and sort of the B2B customer will end up being the big winner in this. And then from there, I think it's going to be sort of the way I'm looking at it today is that you've got big tech certainly in good position. It doesn't mean that they'll grow at the rates that they have in the past, but they're certainly in good position. But then sort of secondary players that are users, like early adopters of this into a business where they've got good customer connection and a lot of data that then they can monetize with customers and give them the value that we were just talking about.
Yeah.
I think those are the players. That's really what I'm focused on.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's huge operational efficiencies that are like going to be coming online. So certainly with workplace automations, I mean, I can only speculate how, like, obviously there's going to be implications on the economy in terms of labor implications, and it seems a lot of people have chosen to, as of recent, to not really focus on that, and they're saying that we're going to repurpose things, but the truth is that you can automate out a lot of labor going forward, and then on top of it, I think the ability to accelerate and compress the amount of time it takes to do certain functions. I mean, these are all going to come out to the bottom line, and the companies that are investing today in solving those problems, and I'm not talking about innovating AI or being like a product, a builder of AI. I'm talking about people that can really interpret the tech and then apply the tech quickly and efficiently and cost effectively. I think that's going to trickle into valuations, but I'm curious. You're following this. I mean, what companies do you like, and why do you think they're positioned well in this we'll call it AI economy?
Yeah, I would say that I've been a little bit more positive all the way through the last 2 years. I've been a little more positive on software companies that have really good customer connection and a lot of data that can help their customers do their business better. And so that's one of the largest segments for me. Companies like a ServiceNow, I certainly
Sure.
think I think they're at the forefront of trying to utilize AI to help customers right now. So I think
Yep.
that that's helpful. They've spent a lot of money on it. And I think that that's tangible results. And then I look like in the further down, smaller companies like an Appfolio, Manhattan Associates, I think eventually will be able to add a lot of value to customers
Yeah.
through the use of AI because they've got that whole retail supply chain that relies on their technology. But I think you have to be more embedded into a niche to be protected. So that's one area. The second is if I zoom out and I think about 5 years, I still think that the amount of compute power needs to increase. And I think that the semiconductor companies that are levered there and have really good returns on capital where you know that the things that they're doing, the margin structure, what they're doing with their excess cash,
Yeah.
that they're putting it, into the right areas of reinvestment, product proliferation for the right parts of where this is going. I think that also is going to be a good place to be. And then the third piece of it, I would say like companies that are data oriented that you might not think about. So like take a Fair Isaac, for example, that does the FICO score. And so being able to take lots of the data that they have and then utilize more insights off of that data where it's a proprietary data set. I think that that can then be augmented with the use of AI, the use of LLMs, and then agentic AI, where you can then program for your customer like insights that they didn't know that they needed to have.
Yeah. 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 No, I mean, I think we're saying the same thing. There's probably going to be like, let's say 5 to 10 companies that probably are either, not on the radar right now that like in 20 years we're like, wow, like, wish we got in on those companies. And those are the companies that are going to revolutionize something, right? But I do come back to this theory that like a well-run company today that successfully embraces AI the right way is just going to increase in value, right? That's the here and now. And I think the chip companies, Intel, to me, I don't know what happened, and I'd love to get your opinion. I think they're potentially a takeover target at this point. But I think NVIDIA really has laid an incredible ecosystem and framework to build upon. I mean, they're already really deep into Tesla. They're into the robotics. I think they're just incredibly well positioned. It's not just chips anymore. It's the software that powers the chips. It's the whole ecosystem. Memory is becoming an important component because like the chips are going like this, right? But the ability to apply memory efficiently, like into LLMs, is a big discussion point as well. And companies like ARM, and that are going to allow the LLMs to process and think, and the reinforcement, and to do that part of this process, including the software, is equally important. So, yeah. I mean, super excited about what's coming up in the next 2 years.
Yeah, definitely. I think so one of the things that, and I've followed the semiconductor industry since the 1990s, so I sort of have seen it evolve. And back in the PC build out, right, when we got PCs, every PC on a desk, Bill Gates said in the early 90s, everyone's going to have a PC on their desk, and everyone scoffed at it.
Yeah, right.
And now we walk around with one in our pocket. So
Yeah.
back in that time, if you were a device manufacturer, you would have the IP, you'd create the chip, and then for the most part, especially if you were larger, you wanted to have the manufacturing held captive so that you could control the process. And then that led to a lot of boom and bust cycles in the semiconductor industry because it was very hard to keep up with demand when things were good. And so you didn't want to gouge your customers on price, but at the same time, it was very hard to deliver what they wanted when times were good. And then when times were terrible, you'd pull back on CapEx because you just didn't have the cash flow to justify it.
Sure.
And so that's where TSMC and the fab companies really came in, and they saw an opportunity where it's like, we're just going to do this in perpetuity. We'll do this for decades, and we'll eventually get more and more of the business, the semiconductor business, and let them have the IP. And Intel never really made that adjustment, and then GPUs became much more important than CPUs, as we've now seen. And so that was they stopped innovating at a pace, and NVIDIA kept, Jensen, give him a lot of credit. He kept, doubling down and tripling down on this vision that, not only were GPUs going to be important for gaming and then it became important for blockchain, but he had that vision that, hey, this is going to be really important for AI somewhere down the road.
Yeah.
And then, that was sort of game over for Intel. And it seems as though the one thing that stands out to me is, and we haven't touched on this yet, is sort of the geopolitical aspect of all of this, because there is a notion that this could be quite a bottleneck if it turned out that there was something that were to happen between China and Taiwan. That's been a long-standing concern, and TSMC's role in all of this. So TSMC has a massive lead in fab technology on the leading edge that's really important to these next generation AI chips, and that's probably not going to change anytime real soon. We see the U.S. government starting to, take this more seriously under the Biden administration. I would imagine that it's going to continue under Trump, but that's still sort of one of the pieces out there that's sort of that's a potential black swan that lingers out there.
Yeah. My thoughts on that, and I echo completely what you say. We saw how quickly China came in and took out Hong Kong. I like a lot of what Trump is saying. Like, I was a never Trumper, and then I think a lot of people, Lex Friedman, Joe Rogan, a lot of people, and they were obviously influencers, but I think they had a political shift, and leaned into what Trump represents, because America really does need to take a gamble. I mean, our debt is so high right now, and I feel like red tape has really, and politics and government. I used to believe there was the government played a role of safeguarding, but now I feel like it's gotten a little bloated, a little too political, and I feel like with where we are in tech, that we could come in and innovate around healthcare and education and government inefficiency. So like Doge, I really do like the vision for that. I think there's a lot of political challenges. You saw a lot of tech billionaires hovering around the inauguration, and it's amazing. Some of them, the only authentic one who's probably there for the right reasons is Elon. Everybody else is going to protect shareholder value and that get caught in Trump's crosshairs. But the one bet that I would say, the one thing here is there's a lot of talk about the Panama Canal, and a lot of talk about other threats that he is making. And I think the minute that I felt if I was China, when we were heavily distracted, like in certainly over in Europe and Ukraine, and then with Israel, I thought it was the ideal time to go into Taiwan. But obviously it has huge and far-reaching implications. But the minute that happens, and if Trump gives China a reason to go in, I think that's going to be not just, for the semiconductors. I think for just the supply chain, it's going to have massive geopolitical implications. I think if there's one if you're a trader or you're going to hedge against something, I think that it might be the biggest threat out there in front of us, and that's just my thoughts on that.
Yeah, it certainly ends up being it's a wild card that has to be. You have to be comfortable that if you're going to be invested in this, you have to be comfortable that it's not inevitable but possible.
Yeah, right.
So, we always have to be cognizant of what the risks are, and we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, and I guess one other thing, just last piece on this, as long as we've sort of gone in the direction of talking about how the governments are viewing this.
Mm-hmm.
I think the last piece of of some of what I would like to explore with you is I've got an impression from listening to what Trump has been doing in his campaign and then in his inauguration speech,
Mm-hmm.
and some of the things that he's done in executive orders so far. And he seems pretty intent on one of the things that he probably would like to have his legacy be, is that he extended U.S. exceptionalism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that he views it, if I'm judging this correctly, and seeing how he's cozied up to a lot of these tech leaders and how the tech leaders have cozied up to him, they're not doing it because they're friends. And so I would suppose that if I'm putting the pieces together, it seems as though they're all sort of in agreement that, hey, this is the time to step on the gas and have the U.S. pull a little further ahead.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I think about Trump, I go back to McKinley and Teddy Roosevelt. I mean, this was an era where, there was bold, strong leadership and yeah, I mean, my view of the world is that I think I agree that we need to be bold right now. I think from a timing standpoint, we have to be bold and we have to move forward, and that's part of the reason I did vote for Trump, because I feel like he's a guy that's going to create a path forward. And America, I think we do need. I think tariffs, are something that we really need to think about. I think we'll make decisions that will put us into a AI arms race. Unfortunately, with China, I think we're going to have to. I don't think we have a choice. I think we have to just go full throttle at this point. But my end game concern is, as we move down this path, and then we will create conflict and tension. Like, it's not going to become less volatile and less tense with China. I think we do run a risk, and when we do hit that threshold of AGI, and we haven't talked about some things like cybersecurity and the military and drones and all these all the negative things, like, we're very pro-abundant and nobody wants to take a dystopian discussion about. I think what's happened is that initially there was a lot of talk about dystopian how things could play out, to like, hey, let's not talk about the future, let's stay focused in the now. And I think that's where we're at, like, we're in the now. But I do feel that that something is going to play out in the next 10 to 15 years. What it is, I don't know. And then we also have to throw quantum into that discussion. At some point, I think it's 10 to 20 to 40 years out, but that's obviously the next iteration of this discussion. And again, it's science fiction right now, but we do need to keep an eye on those things, as we move very quickly down this path.
Absolutely. There's a lot of layers to this, and certainly a lot that's yet to be determined. So there's a lot of excitement ahead. It's never going to be dull. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on,
Yeah,
Rem. This has been a great discussion, and I hope everyone enjoys it. And
yeah.
thanks again. Oh, if anyone wants to learn about your AI conference, where can they find that?
Well, I'm actually in the process of I'm talking about maybe doing a different type of conference, actually on agency and workflows. So I'm kind of it's all stealthy right now, but you can just if you're interested in a conversation, you can just find me on LinkedIn, and always open for interesting talks like this.
Sounds great. Thanks, Rem.
Okay, buddy.
Bye.